Hi, so Nigel here again with some more bonus material in our Jonah series. This little session is based on Jonah 2 and 3. If you've been following our talks on Sundays, you'll know that Paul did a fantastic talk on Jonah 2. And then I, this week, followed up with Jonah 3. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background into both Jonah 2 and Jonah 3. This is optional, and it's just digging a little bit deeper for those who are interested in digging into the text a bit more and into some of the sort of the Bible background. And so most of this material comes from Tim Mackey from the Bible Project. I've been doing a class with him, which you can also do. And in fact, I know at least one person who's taken up that class and is so far enjoying it. It's a sort of 20-hour thing. It's all free and it's all online. If you go to the Bible Project website and then /classroom, or go to the classroom part, then you can find out more about that. Anyway, we talked about Jonah 2, and for the purposes of this little session, I'm going to assume that you've read the Bible passages and that you've listened to the talks from Jonah 2 and Jonah 3 at Winchester Vineyard Church. And thank you for your feedback on the first bonus session, those of you who were kind enough to send me a message about that. So here's Jonah 2, which is mainly taken up with the prayer of Jonah inside the whale. But there is a really beautiful little literary structure. We'll come to that in a second. This is the Bible Project slide first. So this is just a reminder of the overview of Jonah 2. As you can see, there are a lot of similarities in Jonah 1 and Jonah 3. And then when we get to 4 next week, you'll find out there are similarities between 2 and 4 as well, in that they're both prayers, dialogues between Jonah and God. Whereas 1 and 3 are narratives where you find out what's going on in the story, moving the story on. And so at the end of Jonah 1, he'd been thrown into the sea and presumably expected to die. And one other reminder, as Tim Mackey says, in the book of Jonah, everything seems to be upside down and people seem to do the opposite of their stereotypes. In other words, the sorts of things that you'd expect them to do. So including the pagans and including Jonah. And it seems like the only person who is consistent and true to form is God. So that's just a little context reminder. So Jonah 2, there are two different parts of the structure here. This is the narrative around the sort of poem, the prayer that's in the middle. It's really simple, but again, you can see from the language just how beautifully this thing has been put together and how it frames it. So Yahweh appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. That's back at the end of chapter 1, verse 17. And Jonah was in the inner parts of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. That's the start of this. And then you read all of Jonah's prayer, which we'll come to in a moment. And then at the end of that, Jonah prayed to Yahweh from the inner parts of the fish. And Yahweh said to the fish, and it vomited Jonah to the dry land. And so there is the sort of frame for Jonah 2. Just 2 comments on this. The first thing, notice that this is a great fish. It's never a whale, right? I know there's this sort of popular story, Jonah and the whale. But it's never a whale, it's a fish. Although there are some accounts of this where it's thought of more as a monster or a sea monster. But there's a distinct difference between describing this creature as a fish and describing this as a monster. You see, there's a distinction between a fish and a monster. And the distinction is between good and evil, actually. The countries around Israel in the ancient Near East had their own creation stories, creation myths. In their creation myths, they thought very much of evil as chaos monsters, as sea monsters down in the deep, in the sea. And they very much believe that they're gods. There's one particular Babylonian story about a god called Marduk, who came down to conquer evil, beat the sea monster, and established himself as God and created the land. And Genesis is the Hebrews telling of their own creation story. But every now and then you will hear Leviathan or chaos monsters or sea monsters referred to in the Bible. It's kind of a way of just saying, look, this is what we're talking, sort of saying to their neighbours, this is what we're talking about. And actually what happened is this creature in the story of Jonah was always a fish. And being a fish, it's part of God's created world. It was a fish that was created at the start of Genesis. Not necessarily safe, yes, potentially dangerous, but part of God's created kingdom. And what happened is that the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, as we know as the Old Testament, later on, coming towards the time before Jesus, the Hebrew Bible was actually translated into Greek because so much of the nation was Greek. There's a name for it, it's called the Septuagint. And so they took the Hebrew and they translated the whole thing into Greek. And when the Greeks translated the story of Jonah, they were the ones who made this creature into a sea monster as apart from a fish. So the original Hebrew says fish. but the Greeks said sea monster and then that kind of idea of a sea monster became a metaphor for the evil empires of Egypt and Babylon, which is very much part of the prophetic literature. And in fact, you will see in sort of images from the 2nd and 3rd and 4th centuries, in images of Jonah, he will be shown as the monster will be shown as a monster or a dragon or a serpent rather than a fish. So the suggestion is, he's signifying evil, and of course there's a lot of symbolism in that as well. That Jonah went down to evil, and then was rescued from evil. But actually, if you go back to the original, the Hebrew Bible always suggests that this was a fish, and that the symbolism of that is that the fish was sent by God. Yes, it was potentially dangerous, but it was part of God's created being, and so the vehicle which God used to save Jonah was something that God created, a fish, and he was able to make that happen. I think there's something beautiful in that. I hope that makes sense. Another thing that it says in this little section is it talks about the 3 days and 3 nights that Jonah was inside the fish. Now, just to say, obviously 3 days and 3 nights is a theme that you will see through much of the Bible, and without going into too much detail, it implies near death or danger. Whenever you hear about 3 days and 3 nights, it's an ominous journey. An ominous journey, a period of suffering, which will bring you close to the realm of death. Of course, later on we read about Jesus being in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. And obviously there's symbolism there. But in this story as well, Jonah is in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, and what that really implies is that this was a dangerous journey, an ominous journey, and it was a close to death experience, a close to death encounter. And of course, what happens then is Jonah goes. The rest of this chapter 2, is taken up with this prayer of Jonah's, and Paul preached on this, and I don't plan to go into loads of detail, but I just wanted to point out a couple of things about this prayer. You can see from this structure, again, this is Tim Mackey's structure, and again, you just don't see this when you're reading the Bible as such, but it's so nice when somebody sort of draws it out and shows it what the elements of this prayer are and the different structures. So you can see in the A sections calling out to distress to Yahweh, and it's linked by the same themes. And Yahweh, of course, is the name for God, for Lord, God, the Lord of heaven and earth, as apart from gods with a small g, which are generally referred to as Elohim. I'll come to that in chapter 3. Anyway, calls out to distress from Yahweh. And then there's 2 sections. The sections in yellow, the B sections here, are about being cast to the deep, to the heart of the seas. And the deep, of course, is thought of as close to death. Okay, and so if you remember, in chapter 1, we talked about God hurling a storm onto the sea, and then there was a lot of hurling going on. This is the same idea. You cast me to the deep. Okay, so Jonah is saying, oh God, you've hurled me to the deep. You've taken me right down to the bottom of the seas. When it says a river surrounded me, that's talking about a current. He's saying a current is surrounding me and I am getting pulled down. And the whole of the idea of this prayer is about how he is being pulled down. He's quoting a lot from the Psalms. And so, it's sort of slightly going around. So in the first yellow section, B, he's saying, oh, everything's coming down on me. And I've been kicked out of the temple. I've been banished before eyes. I can still look at the temple, but I've been sent down. And then, of course, it gets even more dramatic, I suppose. I'm going down bases of the mountains, underworld. It's bars around me. And then just finally, the end of section, the second B section, but you raised me up from the pit, which of course is a quote from Psalm 40. Yahweh, my God, and when I was fainting, when I was almost at death's door, I remembered you and I prayed to you. And of course, we know that God rescues him and saves him. And it is just interesting to note at the end, the very last section, those who keep idols of worthlessness. It's interesting, it still feels like Jonah is judging people who don't follow God, even though I can't see anywhere in here any place where Jonah acknowledges his own sin, acknowledges his own mistakes, even kind of apologises to God, really. He's instead sort of saying, there are a bunch of, I don't know if he's talking about the sailors, because he wouldn't know, of course, that the sailors had been saved. Although, as somebody said to me last week, it would have been interesting for Jonah to note that as soon as he was thrown into the sea, the storm died down. And I wonder what he thought about that. I with a voice of thanksgiving sacrifice to you. Full rescue belongs to Yahweh. So there's no doubt that Jonah is looking to God at the end of number 2, and he's looking for God to be rescued. And indeed, as Paul preached about Yahweh, God rescues him. Just going to move on to number 3 now, which I spoke about this Sunday. Here is the literary design. It's very simple, chapter 3, just 10 verses. And here again is the literary design of this book. So we see, right at the start, God's actions towards the Nineveh through Jonah. So the words of Yahweh came to him again, call out the message that I speak to you. And then right at the end of that, right in verse 10, we see that God saw the actions and he repented of the evil which he spoke to them. So there's something about God interacting with his people and speaking or not speaking, as the case may be. And in the middle of that is this whole B section, which again is really nicely done, where the Ninevites believed in God and called, I don't know why there's some sort of problem with the slide there, I'm sorry about that. The Ninevites, didn't mean that. The Ninevites believed in God, called for a fast, the king responds, and then he tells the Ninevites to respond as well. And there's, as we know, there's a whole sort of very dramatic response from the Ninevites. They literally, it seems like on a knife edge, just turn around, completely respond to God's word, and start and go completely in the opposite spirit. They're covering themselves in sackcloth, they're going in the fast, they're saying, and they're calling out to God, not knowing, as I said on Sunday, if he's actually going to hear them. And by the way, this translation, when the Ninevites talk about God, that it's in our Bible, it's a capital G because it's assumed the same thing, but in the original Hebrew it's not. It's the Elohim. They're talking about the gods or his God. They don't know that it's God, the God of the universe. They just know it's some sort of God, that they need to turn around their lives and they need to do something. And of course, as we know, it works. And God does change his mind. I spoke about this on Sunday. I talked about the whole meaning of Jonah's sermon, where he says 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. And I said about this word hapak, which could mean overthrown or destroyed. And just here's a little bit more detail on that. I quoted a couple of verses, but one of the meanings of hapak is that it means overturned or destroyed or overthrown. It implies that it's overwhelmingly connected to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right throughout the Hebrew Bible, there are 6 different references there where he refers to this word hapak as in, this is what God did to Sodom and Gomorrah. He overthrew them, he destroyed them. Okay, and there's all sorts of references there that you might want to make a note of or look up later if you want to, in Genesis and Deuteronomy, but all referring to Sodom and Gomorrah. And so, is the suggestion here when Jonah preaches to Nineveh that this is what God is going to do to Nineveh, just the same as he did to Sodom and Gomorrah, he's going to destroy them? Or is it indeed that it's a much gentler version, that the verb can be used in this general sense of just turning over or being transformed or changed? And I quoted a couple of these verses, like for example in 1 Samuel 10 there, the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you and you shall prophesy with them and be changed into another man. So it doesn't necessarily need to mean that God is going to destroy the city, although, as I said, Jonah, I think, thinks he is, and the Ninevites certainly wonder if that's the truth. It might just mean that he's going to change it or transform it, and of course we know that's what happens in the end. But that's kind of part of the point of the whole of Jonah, really. It's all set up with this maybe not, either or, could it be? It's never clear what the author is really trying to say, and I think that's deliberate. It's deliberate because it's designed to make us think, to reflect on the story. Here's just one thing I saw that Tim Mackey said that I thought you might be interested in. This is just a little thing on the faithful Ninevites. The depiction of the Ninevites' faith in God activates an analogy within the Israelites immediately after their rescue from the sea. We're talking about after during the Exodus, when they came out from Egypt and they got across the sea which God parted for them, and so you can see there in Exodus 14:31 it says, Israel saw the great hand which Yahweh acted against Egypt, and the people feared Yahweh and they believed in Yahweh. And so that's what it says in Exodus. The people feared Yahweh and they believed in Yahweh. And just notice here in chapter 1 it says that the sailors, having been rescued from danger, feared Yahweh. So that's sort of echo of part 1 of this Exodus thing. And then it says that the men of Nineveh, having been warned, believed in God. Okay, and so it's just a really nice little echo again. I spoke last time about just these. There's so many hyperlinks in the text, and here's just one great little example of the hyperlink and how it just looks back to that story of the Exodus, which of course frames pretty much all of the Israelites' story and is kind of jumps up right throughout the Old Testament. Here's something else. This is to do with this is the last sort of section really, the repenting Ninevites and the relenting God. So if you look in the middle, there's the quote from Jonah chapter 3. It says, "Let each man turn from his evil." Who knows? This is what the king says. God may relent and turn from the heat of his anger. And then at the end it says, God saw that they turned from their evil ways and relented concerning the evil which he spoke to them. So there it is in Jonah, and you can see some quotes from Exodus there, where something very similar was said between Moses and Yahweh. Turn from the heat of your anger and relent concerning evil. And the narrative then, that was Moses' kind of appeal to God, and then the narrative says just a couple of verses later that Yahweh relented concerning the evil which he spoke to people. And so you've got a story of Moses there, and then on the other side you've got a story of Jeremiah. And something very similar happens. Jeremiah is saying, "I may speak concerning a nation to destroy it, but if that nation turns from its evil, then I will relent," God says, "concerning the evil I plan to do." And later Jeremiah says, "Perhaps they will listen and each will turn from his evil way, and I will relent concerning the evil which I'm planning to do to them." Again, okay, so in each of these stories you've got links between what's going on with Jonah and what's going on with Moses at one side and Jeremiah on the other side. In both of those stories, Moses and Jeremiah play the role as prophet of mediator. They are the ones who ask God, would you do this? Would you turn? Would you relent? In fact, as I pointed out in my talk yesterday, Jonah doesn't do that. Jonah doesn't really say anything, but the people turn anyway. Interesting. And lastly, again, I touched on this, and this is just going into a bit more detail around the vocabulary used. I said, if you remember, that when humans repent, they use this word shuv, which literally means to turn around. But when God repents repents or relents, he can shuv, but there's this additional word nikam, which means to relent or to be satisfied. And nikam is capable of different nuances based on the context. So it can mean to comfort somebody, to comfort their emotional state. So Isaac married Rebekah and he was comforted. Jacob and his son's daughter came to comfort him. Okay, so that's one way that nikam can be used. But here's another way. It can also mean to regret or to change one's mind, which is, I think, what's going on here. And so in Genesis 6, Yahweh regretted that he'd made humanity on the land, and his heart was deeply pained. And in 2 Samuel 24, the angel stretched out his hand to destroy Jerusalem, and Yahweh relented concerning the evil and said, "Stop." And in each example of Yahweh's relenting, it concerns his purpose to bring judgment or blessing on violent people. So there's this quote from Jeremiah here. "At one moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to pull down or to destroy it. If that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the evil I plan to bring on it." And then he sort of flips it round the other way. Or at another moment, I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to build up or to plant it. If it does evil in my sight by not obeying my voice, then I will relent concerning the good which I promised to bless it. So in other words, that's the opposite there. I might bless it, but if they do evil in my sight, I might change my mind. And there's just a little sort of quote from Tim Mackey here. "The God of the Bible has partnered himself with humans, and he does experience emotional pain over their evil. God is portrayed as carrying out his ultimate purposes for history and all creation, regardless of what humans do." This is what it meant in the text that portrayed God as not changing his mind. We looked at this yesterday. Even in the midst of situations where he's clearly responding to human decisions. So there's this underlying sort of sense of God never changing his ultimate purposes, but actually, yes, he does get involved with humans, and sometimes on an emotional level regarding what they do, regarding the actions that they take. This is what Tim Mackey says. "This word, nikama, invites us into the deep mystery of the Creator's purpose to genuinely partner with humans in the course of history." That is what it means when it says God relents. He is inviting us into a mystery where he says, I want to work with humans. I want to work with my people. I'm not just going to be a destroyer God who, ticks the boxes and sends down destruction and never gives people a chance to respond or to repent, to turn around, to change their ways. Which is, again, it all comes back to relationship. It implies relationship. And I quoted this yesterday from Exodus 32. So this is the story about the golden calf, when the Israelites had made a golden calf, and Moses is up on the mountain, and he's saying, and God is saying, God's anger is burning, and he's saying, I'm going to destroy them. They've done it this time. And Moses says, don't do that, please don't do that. And it says that the Lord changed his mind, and he didn't do it. And I want to hit, I'm almost done here, but there's quite a lengthy quote here from Christopher Wright, which has been summarised by Tim Mackey, and I think it's quite long, but I think it's really worth going through this, because I think it just sort of discusses and summarises this whole thing really beautifully, and I think there's something to learn here. So I'm just going to work through this. It says this is about the Deuteronomy story. This is the Moses story, but it's kind of making the same point about God, really. This story explores the mystery about prayer in general and intercession in particular, and it raises some questions. Well, was God really serious in this declared threat? If Moses hadn't interceded, would God have carried out the destruction of Israel? If God was not really planning to destroy the people, did God only pretend to listen to Moses' prayer? Did Moses actually change God's mind? It seems important, first of all, to say that there is not much point in wrestling with the alternative hypothetical scenarios posed by such questions. Both God and Moses appear to be behaving straightforwardly. There is nothing in the text to suggest that God's anger was overdone for mere effect. The threat of destruction was real, and God and Moses recognised that this was a sincere threat that could be countered only with an appeal to prior words and actions of the same God. The real paradox is that in appealing to God to change, Moses was actually appealing to God to be consistent, which may be a significant clue to the dynamic of all genuine intercessory prayer. Yet perhaps there is a hint of the divine intention in God's fascinating words, "Leave me alone." The discussion of this line in Jewish scholarship has sensed deep meaning here. After all, God need not have spoken such words, or indeed any words at all, to Moses. In wrath, God could have acted immediately without informing or consulting Moses in any way. God pauses and makes the divine will vulnerable to human challenge. The fact is that far from human intercession being an irritating but occasional successful intrusion upon divinely prefabricated blueprints for history, Moses' prayer becomes an integral part of the way God's sovereignty in history is exercised. That does not totally solve the mystery, but it puts it in its proper biblical perspective. God not only allows human intercession, God invites it and builds it into the decision-making processes of the heavenly council in ways we can never fathom. Intercessory prayer then flows primarily not from human anxiety about God, but from God's commitment to covenant relationship with human beings. Moses was not so much arguing against God as participating in an argument within God. Oh gosh, that's a line, isn't it? Moses was not so much arguing against God as participating in an argument within God. So part of God is saying, destroy them, and the other part of him is saying, no, give them a chance. And Moses, as he prays, is saying, please remember, you want to give them a chance. That's who you are. You're kind. He's, be consistent how you've always been. And in a sense, that's exactly what what was going on in Jonah when the Ninevites were crying out to God. Although they didn't quite know who they were crying out to, they were appealing to their God, and there's a part of God which is saying, yes, I need to be consistent with who I really am. Such a prayer, therefore, is not only participates in the pain of God in history, but is actually invited to do so for God's sake as well as ours. This is a measure of the infinite value to God of commitment to persons in covenant relationships. I think, just a comment I would make is that there are many ways of viewing God and viewing Christianity and viewing religion, but you just cannot get away from the relationship thing for me. This is all about relationship. God chooses to be in relationship with us. We are in relationship with him. And when we're in relationship, then there aren't always black and whites. There's sometimes grey. Sometimes you've got to make a decision based on what you're seeing and what's happening in front of you. And so in this case, Moses was able to appeal to that part of God that said, hey, you're in relationship with these people, come on, give them another chance. In Jonah, the Jonah himself didn't even make that appeal, but the people of Nineveh did, and they said, cry out. They said, let's do something to try and change this God's mind. And of course that's what they did. And when God saw that, he changed. And so I just think it's a beautiful mystery and something to really ponder on, the fact that God chooses to engage with people and kind of suffers the pain of that as well as the joy of it. As a father myself, I know what it's like to have children who, are very happy to go along with what you suggest, and also quite able to, react against what you suggest and want to do things their own way. And it's both a joy and a pain, and a privilege. It's a privilege of parenthood that can also be really painful. But it's only painful because you love people, and because the relationship is so special, so precious, and so important to you. And I think that's what's going on here. Very last quote from Tim Mackey. God nickams, relents about evil that he threatens based on someone's response, but he never nickams or relents about the ultimate good that he purposes for his creation. I hope that gives you something to think about as you go away and ponder Jonah 3 and what else there is to learn. There are tons of things to learn from this, and we're going to get round to Jonah 4 and the end of this series this coming Sunday. I hope this has been helpful. Again, do give me some feedback, send me an email or whatever if you'd love to, if you want to respond. Bless you. Cheers.